we've been here in the center, John Paul II, doing a homily series during Lent, actually on the theme of mission. We've called it Open and Love the City, Love the Place Where You Live. And we have this image, which I think you might be seeing right now, which is a door which is kind of opening, and there's light coming through on the other side. And it's been a really tough time for us, a strange time for us, as probably as all of us who are here participating in this Mass. God kind of slammed the door shut, which we were trying to open. No, we say we want to be open, we want to love the city, we want to be an open community, not close in on ourselves, just thinking about ourselves. We want to be open, especially to those who are unchurched, who are far away from anything which we might call a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Not because we want to judge them in any way, but because we've experienced the love of God, and we've seen what it does to transform our own lives, and we want to give it on to others. And yet God has been seeming to be closing doors instead of opening them. So it's been a kind of a strange time. And today, again, we have this idea of the open door, an open tomb, which is being pried open by God's power. I'd like to consider something with you which I've been kind of trying to wrestle to the ground, or trying to ask God to help me understand better. Like, why is this happening? We hear this sickness will end not in death, but in God's glory, and through it the Son of God will be glorified. This sickness will not end in death, but in God's glory, and through it the Son of God will be glorified. Why is God allowing it even to happen? Why does he allow Lazarus to die? Or in the first reading, I will bring you out of the graves. I will give you your land back. They're in exile, the Jews. And he's promising to give them their land back. But why were they in exile in the first place? Why were the dead bones in the grave to begin with? And why is God allowing this to happen? And let's make that personal. Why am I in the situation that I'm in? And we can talk about the world. Why is it in the situation that it's in? Why does God allow these kind of things to happen? And what kind of an answer is the gospel giving us? Because that's what we're trying to figure out. What is God maybe trying to tell us in our situation, in my situation, today, about what's going on? Also, especially with my own life. And if you're not going through a tough time right now, don't worry, you will be sooner or later. So maybe the gospel will be able to say a few things for all of us. Now, Christ says, when the disciples ask him, he says, this sickness will not end in the death but in the glory, God's glory, and through it the Son of God will be glorified, which is kind of mysterious because it does end in death, But he says, and through it the Son of God will be glorified. Now, I like to suggest to you, or kind of the problem behind this is, how the sickness leads to God's glory and that a man be fully alive, if it seems that almost God is using death of Lazarus for his glory. He dies, and that's supposed to serve God's glory somehow. I mean, who wants to have something to do with a God like that? Who's kind of self-serving and is making us suffer in the process. It's a tough question, at least it seems one to me, and what's he trying to say, And yet, at the same time, it seems that Christ is somehow saying, well, it's not against Lazarus' well-being. God isn't using him as a plaything, as if somehow that would lead to his glory. I was thinking about trying to, wrestle that idea, and a quote came to my mind from Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, who died in the year around the 202, so a very early church father. He says, "The glory of God is man fully alive." The glory of God is man fully alive. This sickness will not end in death, but in God's glory, and through it the Son of God will be glorified. In other words, God's glory, this sickness will not end death, but end up in God's glory, which is that this Lazarus be fully alive. Maybe he wasn't fully alive beforehand, and God is saying, but I want him to be fully alive because that's what my glory is. And through it, the Son of God will be glorified. Now, this is really deep stuff which John is telling us here. We'll try to go deeper into it as we come along. There's maybe 3 ways I'd like to offer to you, or 3 ideas how this is manifesting God's glory. First, on the physical plane, it's showing God's power just on a mere physical plane. It's the manifestation and the revelation of the power of God. Physical death and life. When he had said this, he cried in a loud voice. Imagine Jesus, normally we think of Jesus speaking softly maybe, or talking to us, encouraging us. You don't see him crying a lot, like shouting. Lazarus, here, come out. And you hear how Martha is objecting. It's the 4th day. It's also for the Jews important, Judaically speaking, because after 3 days, you no longer claim somehow on the body. It's like, on the 4th day, he's dead. He's starting to smell. It's over. Like, forget it, And so, 4th day, don't open the grave. He stinks already. And here we see God's words don't just describe reality, like Bishop Aaron would say. Our words, usually, they describe reality. But God's words, they make reality to be. We describe things how we see them with our words. When he says things, they are. He says, let there be light, and there's light. And he says to the blind man, see, and he sees. Now, his word is a word of power. And we see that a little bit in ourselves as well, that our words can have, there's something very mysterious about the word, that they can have deep effects on people. You tell a 13-year-old, a 12-year-old girl, in song class, she's worth nothing and can't sing anything. That might have horrible effects on that person's life. Especially that person telling her is her dad, or the other way around. Wow, you can sing in a way that's so beautiful. And you realize that sometimes a few words can have more impact on a person's life for decades than a lot of other different things. And especially here, we see the power of the word to build up. The devil tries to kind of imitate that, and he tries to destroy with the word as well. But in the degree that our words participate in the truth that God is, they can be very, very powerful. But how much infinitely more is the power of God himself saying to the dead man, come out of the grave. And he comes out. And I think, now just merely on this sphere of things, this should give us already a lot of trust, a lot of confidence. God is in charge. He hasn't lost control of the reins of history. He's in charge of things. And we're called to trust in him in a deep way, because he is the Lord of history. And that power where he can also tell each one of us, I want you to live. I want you to get out of your addiction. I want you to, I desire and I want with all my heart that your marriage, which is such a mess, is turned around. And to have that trust, that confidence that God is capable with his word of changing reality, of bringing nothingness out of nothing, something into existence. So that's kind of the first level that we see. A second level we see here is maybe more the spiritual level. It's more this idea of overcoming spiritual death. St. Augustine, there's 3 recounting of Jesus raising somebody from the dead. Talitha cum, the little girl, the 12-year-old, the son of the widow of Nain, and here Lazarus. And Augustine sees kind of a progression. Like the girl is kind of a representation or a symbol of somebody who's not going down the right path, but it's pretty easy to overcome that kind of spiritual death. There's a second kind of spiritual death, which is more advanced towards my personal hell, which is represented through this son of the widow of Nain. And here we have Lazarus, who's been 4 days dead, like he's gone. He's as spiritually dead as you can be spiritually dead. That's the idea of St. Augustine. And here again, this is Jesus' most powerful miracle, because He brings him out of that mess that he's in. And we see, first of all here, why? No, there's kind of another question behind this whole thing that's happening is, they tell Jesus that Lazarus is dying. And what's his reaction? His beloved friend is dying. And because he loved him, he stays 2 more days where he's at. I mean, who of us would, when we hear that a relative, a close friend of us is dying, let's stay put, let's not go to visit him? It seems so strange. And yet Jesus allows that to happen. He wants that to happen because, the gospel tells us, because he loved Lazarus. So what's that all about? Now, how do you understand that? Why is he allowing Lazarus to suffer if he loves him? In that he loved him, we see a little bit later when he's before the tomb and he sees Mary and the Jews, he sees them weeping, and we have the shortest sentence of Jesus in the whole Gospel of St. John. Jesus wept. And then it says, he was moved deeply from his bowels. No, in the English translation it says, it came straight out of his heart. Like there is this deep sighing, and he's totally moved within himself. He's trembling. God hates death. God hates all forms of dysfunction which sin has led to. He hates it. He hates suffering. He doesn't love it. And I think that we have to remember when we try to figure out, okay, why in the world is Jesus allowing his friend to suffer sickness and death? Well, one of the big messages of this gospel is because he loves him. Because he loves him. He's allowing all this to happen. And try to get your brain around that idea. It's really difficult. And yet, he says to Martha, when Jesus says, take away the stone, he says, he's stinking already. And Jesus says, Martha, did I not tell you, if you believe, you will see the glory of God. Now, what is the glory of God? We already said it's man fully alive, but in St. John, in his gospel, this glorification of Jesus, what does it refer to? The crucifixion. The crucifixion. Why? Why is the crucifixion in the Gospel of St. John the glorification of Jesus Christ? Because the crucifixion is the manifestation, is the revelation of the love of God. It's on the cross where God reveals to us what he has in his heart. They will look upon him whom they have pierced, he would say a little bit later to us. The open heart of Christ on the cross is the revelation of what God is. Self-giving love. And because God is love, that's all he's capable of doing, is to love. And what is being presented us here is when he says, okay, this is not for death. This is not tending to death, but this is the sickness will end not in death, but in God's glory, and through the Son of God will be glorified. How will, through the death of Lazarus, Jesus be glorified? Because if you keep reading the chapter 11 of St. John, which we didn't read today because it's already so long, but if we keep reading, we read that the high priests decide to kill Jesus because he raised Lazarus from the dead. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. What led directly to the glorification of Jesus on the cross was the death of Lazarus. And this is a huge mystery. First of all, because what John is getting at here is, if we take the death of Lazarus in a spiritual sense, in the sense of spiritual death, it reminds us of what we hear in the night of Easter. Oh, happy fault that brought us such a Redeemer. It's the death of the sinner that brings Christ, that brings God to the cross. He changes. That doesn't make sin good. That doesn't make the death of the sinner good. But it makes our God awesome. It makes him incredible. Because he's so moved interiorly that he weeps over the sinner. That he is trembling before the fate of the sinner. And so that the sinner does not have to die eternally, he does in our place. And this is what Caiaphas would say, not because he was Caiaphas, but because he was the high priest that year, St. John tells us. You did not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish, John 11:50. And moved in his depth with a sigh that came straight from his heart, verse 33. Straight from his heart. Jesus is pierced, his heart is pierced. The lance pierces his heart. The sin of the world pierces his heart. But precisely that piercing makes us call the worst day of the year, where we've killed our God, where we've hung him on the cross, Good Friday. Because he turns the evil upside down. Out of evil, he's capable of bringing out of something evil, something horrible, something terrible, something so great as the revelation of the heart of God, which brings us life, which brings life to the sinner, a degree of life that we didn't have before, that we couldn't even imagine, that we couldn't even dream of. So the sickness will end not in death, but in God's glory, in Lazarus becoming fully alive in this life through grace, and in the next through the communion with God. Now, there's a last idea I'd like to share with you briefly, which is that of vicarious suffering. And this is like a super difficult. This is a super difficult idea, no, and it's like it's a tough one, and I think one can only understand it really not logically, but in the degree that we allow ourselves to participate in it. It's this idea of St. Paul. I make up in my body what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. I think it's in Colossians 1:24. I make up in my body what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. For some reason, Christ is giving Lazarus the opportunity to participate in his act of glorification. And that's something which is glorifying Lazarus. I think if you would have asked Lazarus after his resurrection from the dead, if it was worth it, he would say definitely yes. In that very moment where he was suffering, where he was dying, probably not. But afterwards, when he was risen up by Christ and then was able to live a life of grace, and tradition says he's died, and actually you can still visit his tomb in Cyprus. But he would live this life of communion with God, become a disciple of Jesus in a very profound way, a witness of the resurrection. He would say it was worth it. It was worth it. But that doesn't make the suffering easy. And yet, because he loved him, Christ makes him participate in his own suffering and death. And this is a huge mystery, and grasp those who can grasp it, But I think precisely maybe also in this moment of history of the world, for all those of you Christians who are trying to walk away with Jesus, this is a deep mystery. But it's something, if you can start allowing yourself to live it, is something extremely beautiful and something very profoundly enriching for our lives, that allowing ourselves to be taken up into the mystery of Christ's suffering and death, allowing us to participate in that for the salvation of the world. And maybe some of the things that we're suffering under right now, not being able to physically have communion with Christ in the Eucharist, being forced to, more like live with our Bible and live on live stream, things like that. Some of you are suffering because of illness, because of what's happening, or in your close family, maybe you've lost some loved ones. This sickness will end not in death, but in God's glory, and through the Son of God will be glorified for the salvation of the world. Thomas, when he hears that he's going up to Jerusalem, what does he say? Let's go up and die with him. And this is what Paul would say later, I'm crucified with Christ on the cross. Con cruci fixus sum cruci. I'm crucified with Christ on the cross. it's a big mystery. This one, it's a tough one. This third one, this vicarious suffering, that we're called to suffer with Christ for our brothers, to suffer with Christ, solidarity with him, to participate in his my God, why have you forsaken me, for the life of the world. And that's how I would like to invite you. This is like, this is not beginner's class, right? It's and who am I to speak, right? But if we're able to do that, my dear friends, I think you will experience more and more something of what Paul would call the freedom of the children of God. Let's pray for each other, that we might open the doors of our heart to let shine the resurrection, the life of Christ into our hearts, and that we might believe in his power on the physical level, on the spiritual level, on the level of vicarious suffering with us, to have ourselves united to him for the salvation of the world. Amen.